Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining me. This is a very special seminar on the Enneatype 2. Now, for those of you that don't know anything about the Enneagram, you can go off to my AHA Intelligence YouTube channel and find the promo video I did explaining the very interesting history of the Enneagram, which was in fact not born from psychology or any kind of behavioral science as we know it today, but actually something that came to us through the mind of a mystic, and his name was Gurdjieff from the 13th century. Fascinatingly, the symbology and the depth of meaning that the Enneagram holds is way more ancient than what we would believe. It's actually a symbol that has moved through different time, space continuum, over in different cultural groups and through different mystical traditions, and was used initially to explain this really interesting phenomenon of energy and how it moves in 9 different directions. Now, how does it come into the minds and meaning of each and every one of us? Well, that's what the Enneagram has really spent decades explaining and working through in the form of many different testing systems cross-culturally around the globe and through different providers. But the main people that started this all off was a man called Oscar Sanchez and later on Dr. Claudio Naranjo. Now, I have had the privilege, and it was an immense privilege, to study with Dr. Claudio Naranjo for 4 years. I was in his training system, and then was even more enamored by the depth of work that he had already taught to all his students, who had then become facilitators in their own right of the Enneagram typology. And what's fascinating about his style of work was that he truly believed that every single human being is a certain type on the Enneagram as a very specific style of ego that develops out of the childhood frustration of not feeling that you will be loved if you don't accept yourself and make certain adjustments. So the Enneagram was born really at a time where mystical teachers were still busy investigating the science of the human condition, and at a time where psychology and all of these very interesting tools that we have today was not really available to us. And so it went through a very different historical phase for it to finally reach the hands of the men like Oscar Sanchez and Dr. Claudio Naranjo that I mentioned. And it was then actually that it was tested, investigated, researched, and was thought to explain what has now become named as the neurosis of character. What does that mean? It means that every single one of us develops a personality. We each have a character, a style in our personality that is forming a version of who we are that we end up believing we actually are, but actually never are and never were. It's just a kind of edited version of you and all that you're about. And it comes about because we believe we cannot be loved or accepted unless we start pandering to the needs of others, or we start living up to the expectations of society, or we follow the rules of the world and or our families, especially our mothers and fathers. And this is where we domesticate our instinct, and we become actually quite trained in being guarded, to have certain limits, to not express certain parts of ourselves, and maybe even push down certain parts of who we are, all the way into the shadow or the unconscious, some have said, where we bury it, push it away, and in fact believe we are not that, or never come close to that in our lives. Now, there's many reasons why we do all this, as I've explained. One is to be accepted, to feel loved. We maybe are not going to be met by parents that are all embracing and unconditional. They have certain limits themselves. And so we know now very clearly that we all then will operate with a kind of ego. And an ego is nothing more than this neurosis of character. It's a part of us that is neurotic, that gets really frustrated and doesn't always feel validated, doesn't always understand the world in its great, expansive magnificence. It's a part of us that is constricted by, some spiritual teachers will say, the three-dimensional layers of being. In other words, the material world, what we can see, what we can touch, what's easy to understand to the five senses. And when we are confining ourselves in this way, it means that we can actually become a very reduced version of ourselves, and we can actually end up having all kinds of strange, repetitive, irregular, sabotaging type behaviors. And these are all, yes, produced by our egos. Now, according to the Enneagram, there are 9 different types of egos, and those 9 different types can be verified or vary into 3 different subtypes, and each subtype has a special reason for occurring under that one enneatype. So just like you see the numbers around a clock, you have the same kind of numbers, but they only go up until 9, and you have 3 different types on each number. And today I want to talk to you about one of the features that shows up in the type 2, the type 4, the type 7, and the type 9 in very interesting ways. But I want to point very specifically at the type 2. So tonight's Enneagram teaching is all about the people-pleasing behavior that some of us may develop if we are a type 2 as a very dominant habit pattern in our behavior. And we might still carry aspects of it as a 4 and as a 7 and as a 9. Now, this doesn't mean that all the other types don't do this behavior, because they very well might. And it also doesn't mean that the 2s are the only ones that do it and they do it the most, right? I have alluded to the fact that we each have different aspects of the Enneagram in us, but one of them is more dominant. In fact, one of them is the passion part of the personality. And it means it's the drive, the part of us that is really focused on meeting a certain need in this way. That will be the enneatype. There are ways to get tested. If you're interested, you can ask me about them. I don't advise many tests. I really advise one specific test for a very specific reason. And it is because I once thought I was one type. And when I did this test, after many people couldn't see that type inside of me, and I still wrestled with it, I did the test and really managed to see another part of my deeper enneatype than what I had previously assumed I could be. And from that test, I realized and gained so much respect for the deeper layers of what Enneagram typology teaches us. So when I speak about this specific type of people-pleasing behavior, it shows up in a 4 enneatype. It shows up in a 7 and a 9, as I've said, but also specifically in this 2. So what is a 2? A 2 is the mother of the Enneagram, or the caregiver. Often we talk about the example of Mother Teresa as a very good example of a 2. But there are many different types of 2-ness in many different people. In fact, you may have someone that's not this 2 type that shows still a lot of this kind of caring, empathic nature. And one example is in healers, therapists, empaths, who may sometimes be a type 2, but there might also be something else, but they have a very empathic nature. So they could also be showing this habit pattern of being a people pleaser. Now, there's also a habit pattern of this sometimes in the 4, because the 4 swings sometimes between a 2 and a 1. And this means that the 4, which is the romantic idealist or the unique creative part of the Enneagram, the part of the Enneagram that has very specific tendencies to idealize life, to romanticize life, but to also feel a deep level of pain on the existential level, and therefore has at times ways of being quite in the feeling space, and might be someone that feels very intuitively a lot of things and a lot of people's feelings and a lot of dynamics around them. So they could also be very sensitive and might end up also having a journey to make out of being a people pleaser. Maybe for different reasons to it too, but as you could see, they might still be somebody that tries to take care of others by doing something or saying something in a way that will not create more emotional turmoil, chaos, or even conflict. I mentioned that it's also in the sevens. Sevens are really interesting in that they have at a young age, possibly with both parents, but certainly with one, had to take care of that parent in some way. And this may not be directly. It may not be that the parent was sick and they had to bring them chicken soup. It could have been more indirectly that the parent was just sometimes very unavailable emotionally. And so the seven would need to learn to please that parent in order to have their needs met. And so we can see that people-pleasing behavior in a seven as well. And then I mentioned the 9, which is not a classic example of people-pleasing, maybe not even so clearly indirectly, but I would like to put it on the list because 9s are the peacemakers of the Enneagram, where the 7s are the enthusiasts. So the 7 is always interested in new experiences, very into stimulation, very creative in its own right, but always exploring, always discovering, very optimistic. Whereas the 9 starts to hide away. 9s can be extremely loyal. They can be really amazing negotiators, great mediators, but they tend to forget their own needs. And at times they might end up really doing anything possible to avoid conflict. And for this reason, I put them on the list because people pleasing is also about avoiding conflict. So let's go a little deeper now into the qualities I'm referring to when I talk about people pleasing. And of course, this is not an easy topic. I'm very aware that for some people, this is a debilitating habit pattern. And for many of us, it's certainly been important to learn how to say no to other people, how to suffer the consequences of saying no to people who might not like your answer. We know now that there are so many reasons that in order to stay healthy, we need to have good boundaries. We need to make sure we're not taking care of others in a self-sacrificing way. And we have a lot of religion and a lot of spirituality that teaches us how to be martyrful, how to serve, how to be considerate and caregiving towards others. And we have schools of thought that are talking about this kind of volunteering for humanity and this philanthropic humanitarian approach, which I totally believe in and really support. But what we need to put in perspective and keep in balance is the fact that when we are being that way, or when we have those goals and ambitions, or when it's in our nature to be that way, we may have to still learn a little bit more about the neurotic aspect of it, the dysfunctional, maybe overdoing it part of it, that makes us do it without true discernment. And this discernment is the kind of decision making that we might need at times to not do that behavior because it's not in our best interest or in the interest of the other. And it might even be that we end up over giving and doing harm by giving. And I give you a great example of this. Where years back, I was involved in many different NGO projects, and I had noticed where I was from in South Africa. I was born in Africa, grew up in South Africa. There was a lot of projects that were helping underprivileged communities. There were sustainable development projects. There were all kinds of attempts to try to do good, but often there would be reports at the end of certain projects that would show that there can be just as much harm done when somebody goes into a community and tries to impose a set of values or a certain set of ideas onto that community and says, well, we should do things like this because that's a better way to do it. And there's a lot of bias, judgment, and maybe even some stereotyping that goes on that causes us to impose help onto others. And sometimes we might, in fact, do harm. So it was only until I moved to Cyprus, where I now live, where I discovered the work of World Vision, who had woken up to the fact that sometimes peacekeeping work, NGO work, all this kind of do-good humanitarian work can actually do harm. That's not to say it's not valuable and it doesn't do good, but it's also to say that we need to be very mindful of what is driving us to help others. And this is the most important thing of the enneatype 2 and this people-pleasing behavior. Because it could be that we are appearing to be helpful to others and pleasing the other person, when in fact, there's something deep down inside of us that's actually not in agreement with that. There could be a part of us that we're trying to hide. And so we go ahead and say yes, when in fact we mean no. Or we make time to be available for a certain project at work when we don't have the time, but we're just afraid of the boss not approving of us if we say no. So there's all these complicated reasons why we might end up people pleasing. But what's for sure is that people pleasing behavior is all about validating the self. So not always, but there are very few times that it's not, but certainly if it's in a neurotic form, or if you're doing it a lot, or it's a habit pattern that you can't stop, or you're not discerning about it, it's very likely that you could be doing it because you're either avoiding conflict, you need someone's approval, and or your own approval at times can be the approval you're looking for, because inside you might have an idea that only if I say yes and help others am I a good person. And that can be quite a dangerous thing to operate, because you can still be a good person without helping someone when you don't have the time, right? And so if you've wired it up like that, you could, yes, be looking for other people's validation or your own. And it could also be that people-pleasing behavior is there as a way of trying to work with toxic relationships, because there isn't any other idea of how relationships could work. So underneath that then is the need to be accepted, to feel like you belong, to be loved, accepted. And this is what starts to promote this behavior to become very common and very well entrenched inside of you. So there's another aspect to people pleasing that I want to cover, which is all about the disharmony that starts to happen between the outside mask that might be seen by others and the inside deeper feeling. And this disharmony is like a disconnection. And people-pleasing can become then a kind of mask that is worn to try to protect oneself from these deeper feelings that might sometimes be in conflict with what other people want, might be in conflict with our own other feelings inside of us that maybe want other things but can't really come into harmony with these other parts of things that we maybe want. And also this disharmony then starts to become a kind of problem that we can only solve by staying in the disconnection. And that means on the outside, I'm one thing, on the inside, I'm another thing, but these two never really meet in the outside world. And that disharmony is like a kind of lying in a way. And this is the destructive part of people pleasing that starts to become really painful for relationships and for the person who's doing the people pleasing eventually, because the time comes where it's very difficult for others to truly understand the real you that's behind the mask, and for you to have the courage to speak and communicate and connect and really come through to become who you truly are in the outside world. It's a profound journey. And if anything, it's the point, the reason for the Enneatype 2 type character to heal that wounding by becoming more and more able to confront deeper needs, deeper feelings, express these deeper needs and feelings to others, and then in fact even deal with the consequences. It's about growing, maturing into that strength and courage to face the truth of living and the truth of being and the truth of one's own nature. So how do you go about doing that? Well, it's good to acknowledge that there is a line that happens out of love for those relationships and the fear of losing that love. So it might not be the kind of lying from malicious intent to hurt people, but at some point, it's very, very important to start to acknowledge that it is a kind of deception that needs to be fixed. So this is one very important step I'm going to be suggesting people make. If you see you're a people pleaser and you have trouble saying no, or you end up portraying something more likable, it's important to start learning how to say no. Now, there's a great psychologist out there from Canada, Dr. Jordan Peterson. It's quite controversial, but he has a really amazing set of videos about agreeability. And with that, he's talking about the part of our nature that might be likable, wants to never be in conflict, likes to be agreeing with other people, and tries in many ways quite naturally to be in connection, in harmony with others. But if this is in your nature, Jordan Peterson says, it's going to be very important for you to learn to say no. And he actually advises that we all learn the skill of being able to say no in as much as we need to, and never less than that, because no requires a certain kind of strength in us to protect our own inner space when others cannot, or when others can fail to see the reason for us being disagreeable. We need to be able to put the word no out there. And if we don't learn that skill, we can be in great danger. And of course, it goes without saying that if we are learning that skill, we also have to have the courage to maintain it. And he speaks about agreeable type personalities, very similar to the people-pleasing type I'm talking about today, are personalities that struggle to learn to put boundaries, not simply to just say no, but to draw limits. And this is something that we all need to learn as a step in our own maturation. So for Dr. Jordan Peterson, as support for what I'm saying, I would love to inspire you to go and watch his content and learn more about agreeability and how important it is, if you have that nature, to learn to say no, to be able to set boundaries, and to learn to be assertive. These are all three types of life skills that really help people pleasers to start putting down very specific limits about their people-pleasing behavior. And think of it like this. This is not just about you remedying your people-pleasing behavior. This is a step in your own growth and your own maturity, is to learn to be able to protect yourself, to be able to say no when it's necessary, and to be able to put down limits. Very important for agreeable personalities, very important for people pleasers. My second suggestion for you, tip number 2, is to really deeply acknowledge that the past does not predict the future. You remember when I said that people pleasers tend to lie out of love for others and sometimes out of fear, right? Well, this is based on the idea, the error perception, the incorrect idea, the crazy idea, we say in Enneagram work, that others are going to be like your parents or like your caregiver in childhood that could never respond to you in a way that was comforting or reassuring or safe even. And because of that response you got in childhood, there's the assumption that many people will not be okay with you if you disagree with them. This often comes from a kind of childhood injury where maybe the father or your father might have ended up in a rage if you had said no when he asked you a certain question and you objected, or you didn't agree, or you didn't want to comply. And this creates a deep, deep fear within. And of course, if it's in a parent figure like a father, it might happen often, not just once, where you see this was never tolerated by the father, that the child disagrees or the child has a different opinion, or you, if you're the people pleaser, had that experience and then may end up believing and perceiving relationships to always be threatening if and when you bring your contrary view, your disagreement, or your disagreeability. It's also possible that a person that's a people pleaser has a kind of childhood experience or a pattern with the mother where there isn't the response from the mother that is comforting or soothing or kind, and perhaps even a mother who is unable to tolerate certain behavior or has no patience, or maybe a mother that had an illness and therefore has limited capacity to deal with certain things, so could end up hormonally imbalanced and frustrated a lot of the time, and or could end up badly behaved and just unable to calmly manage certain differences in the way the child is responding. If this was anything close to your history, it's really important that you realize your past does not predict your future. My second tip. So every time you're in relationships with people where you find yourself doing the people-pleasing behavior, it will take some work with a professional person to learn to perceive this person differently and to learn to test out and take the risk to exercise different kinds of behavior with this relationship that are going to help you learn how to remodel your way of interacting different to the past. Now, my third tip goes back to the lying, and it's really important to realize that that part of perceiving yourself in the social space as someone that needs to wear a mask, and you behind the scenes as someone who has other feelings, other needs that you don't disclose, you don't share, is a kind of deception that can really damage relationships. And once you realize this, you can also realize that doing that behavior can really hurt the people out there that you love, that you share your time with, and that you say you care about. And so it's important to begin to realize that that disconnection, that disharmony that I spoke about before, is something that does cause possible pain in your friendships, your relationships, and in your companionship. And so once you realize that, you can begin to stop some of that disharmony and start learning to take the risks and have the courage to test out different ways of revealing more of your own personal needs. Another tip for you, number 4, is this art of communication. We all need to evolve. We all need to develop. We have many things that we work with in life that take us into the need for deeper communication. How do you express yourself to others? Do they understand what you need? Can you ask in ways that inspire other people to give you things? Can you develop this as an art in your life? Can you see it as a really well-meaning endeavor that you spend time investing your energy in communicating? Maybe you take courses on how to do it better. Maybe you learn how to do it without violence and non-violently. Maybe you start figuring out ways to tune into yourself more and more regularly. Maybe you ask other people more about how they look at their own personal needs and how they request things in their relationship. These are very, very important things to get busy with, because if you never learned it from your parents or you didn't see it happening there, it's even more reason to start studying this so that you can develop the art of communication. Step number 5 is to validate yourself. Now, this may be quite hard to do, but I have a great tip for you. In the morning, in the mirror, you begin to say to yourself, I am a genius. And anything I wish or want is possible. I am a genius. Anything I wish or want is possible. I am a genius. Anything I wish or want is possible. 3 times a day, 5 days a week, 2 days off, and you will see some amazing results. There is a moment in the mirror where you begin to interject, we say, what you have expressed to yourself, you start to absorb. And this becomes a very powerful reminder of the miracle of nature that you are. Everyone is unique. Everyone has a special signature style of being. You are no different. You are no better and you are no worse. You are magnificent. You're a miracle of nature. And as such, it's important that you learn to absorb your own validation and your own self-love, and to practice developing that. So often, people pleasers are looking for others to affirm them and what they do. They are looking for others to approve of what they do or don't do. And they are looking for others to validate them. It's time to stop that perception, stop that task, stop that searching, and rather go within. You need to develop your own power source within. And this may take months, years, doesn't matter. It's a lifelong task to learn to love yourself in the deepest way possible, for the pure truth that you are a force of nature. There's an important step we need to make, point 6, in making time for the self, to really spend time with yourself, to know yourself, to love yourself, to remedy yourself, to reinvent yourself, to heal yourself, to progress yourself, and to really become more of yourself. It takes time, and it takes self-reflection. So how can you put that on your list? How can you begin to make time for yourself? Maybe on a daily basis. And if you can't manage that, you certainly need to be taking 4 to 7 days off, away from anyone else during the year, where you spend time just with you. This is how you begin to create your own medicine. And I would love to share more ways for you to do that. You just have to follow me or come onto my website to find that, helenaha.com. We can even have a private chat and even some private mentoring or coaching for you to do that on the deepest level. Time for you is very, very important. It's something that we're starting to need more than ever before, because our way of connecting has changed so much through tech. So this connecting with others and connecting with the self without a device, without an app to take you there, without anything as a prop or a tool, is very, very important. This is how you listen to yourself and how you give yourself nourishment. This is how you make your own medicine. Now, it's also important to know where you're going. This is step number 8. And 8 is telling us a little bit more about true agency. Now, you have power, you have direction, you have intention, and it's important to cultivate these things. When you're pleasing other people, it's very easy to get pulled into where they want to go to dinner, what they think is important in the movie that makes a special message for humanity, or the kind of work that they value. And you might find yourself ending up in many different situations and scenarios where you are doing things for the other person, or even living your life according to the values of the other person, according to the needs and desires of your parents, according to whatever limits, blocks, stops other people have that you don't want to intrude, pass, or work past. So how can you stop doing that? Well, you need to build very, very strongly your own direction. Where are you going? What is it that you want? What is going to make you happy? Ask yourself, where can I be in 5 years' time? Where do I want to be in 5 years' time? How am I going to get there? What's so important to me that I would absolutely regret it if I didn't reach it or experience it when I died? Start to make some lists. Look at what makes you happy. Look at where you find your own peace in life. What brings passion to your life? Where is beauty to be found for you? How are you going to build these different clues along a path to take you where you want to be going? My tip number 9 for you is all about relationships and toxicity. There are many things that people pleasers and everybody else do to keep themselves in toxic behavioral patterns. Now, by toxic, I mean stuff that you might be doing that's not good for you, stuff you might be doing, or things that you might be used to doing that are not only not good for you, but also really bad for you. And this can be anything from an addiction to a relationship that's really not healthy, and to very specific ways you treat yourself when you're doing either of these things. So these kinds of toxic dynamics can be found often in toxic relationships. So look at the people you're hanging out with. What are they bringing to your life? Are they perpetuating this people-pleasing behavior? Try to pluck 1 to 3 people from your environment, if you are a people pleaser, that are promoting this behavior, either quietly or directly. It might even be that they do nothing. You are the one that has this dynamic with them. Take ownership of it. Start to find ways to disconnect from that person or that relationship. Try to do it carefully in the beginning. And if you see you really struggle, get some support. You will need to replace that relationship with something meaningful, nourishing, supportive. Look what that could be and see if you can find a way to keep some distance for 3 months. From that time, you will begin to really discerningly know how to select whether this relationship comes in with certain conditions or stays out for good. Another tip I have for you, which is really, really connected to most of what I've been saying now, is to stop seeking for things outside. Instead, I want you to try to pour your energy into yourself, looking into what is it that I need? What can I give myself? How can I help me? How can I stop looking for others to help? How can I just be with me? So one way I put this is to stop seeking. And this is a great tip for any of us at any point in life, to simply stop seeking. Now, after this is my last, but perhaps the most important tip of all. And it's an entire attitude, an entire behavior pattern that I've been talking about attached to it. And then also a whole set of feelings that go together with that. We often say in cognitive behavioral therapy and actually positive psychology that there is a very strong direct link between body, mind, and behavior. So you've got body, mind, and behavior. You've got things going on in the neurochemistry of the body. Every time you feel that you are not valuable or you undermine yourself, you are creating a certain set of emotions. And you might be addicted to those. You might actually feel way more comfortable believing that about yourself than anything else. Remember that bit I said about the miracle of nature that you are, the genius that you look into the mirror and discover every morning for a while. That may feel so uncomfortable. It may feel very uncommon for you to validate yourself like that, to see yourself in a powerful way. And so you might do this one behavior that I really want to help you limit and stop. You might undermine yourself regularly. You might even apologize regularly. And so both of these things must stop. So no more apologies and no more undermining yourself. From now on, it's very, very important that you start to weed out those moments where you find yourself excusing yourself for something that you feel you've done wrong, or you think you should have done better, or you have some story about, because it does nothing other than undermine you and your power to the point where you are again somehow living for the sake of the other and the perception they may have of you. This is all again in your own mind. It could be that you've created those relationships and you sustain them by keeping this behavior of people pleasing alive. So it's time to stop that. There are very specific times where one needs to apologize, and there are a whole bunch of others that are not necessary whatsoever. In fact, it's very important that you begin to find those moments where you feel undervalued and undermined, and where you start to undermine yourself, and extract them from your life. I hope this has been helpful for you. We've reached the end of our list. I'm going to recap these for you so that you can just write them down if you haven't done that yet, or go back and watch this video and see how it can help you. And I would love to join you next time for another video on one of these deeper layered behavioral patterns that we need to remedy in the future, which also shows up in many different types of ego formations. And each time we spend together, you'll learn more and more about these very important shifts we each need to be making to mature out of these defense systems and these crazy ideas that our egos carry, all so that we can see reality much more clearly as it is, not as we wish it to be. So, how do you stop people pleasing? Number one, learn to say no and to set boundaries. Number two, the past is not your future. Number three, realize that when you are lying, you are hurting people. Number four, commit towards the art of communication. Number five, validate yourself. Number six, make time for you. Number seven, know where you're going. Number eight, remove toxic people. Number nine, stop seeking. And number 10, no more apologies. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. I wish you a beautiful day, a beautiful evening, a beautiful morning, wherever you are in the world watching this. My name is Helen R. Giroux, and for short, helenaha.com. That's where you can find me. Answer any of my questions on any of my posts online and on social media. Find me on LinkedIn, Facebook, or Instagram. I look forward to meeting you. And if you want to schedule some time with me, I would love to be there for you. What you seek is seeking you. Rumi. Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you.